I'm Hilary, and I'm going to be talking about why should science curriculum be standards-based with a focus on inquiry learning. The reason why I chose this topic is because science curriculum has been stagnant for a very long time, despite lots of talk about changing it and making it more relevant for learners, and I wanted to discuss how and why that should actually happen. So in this presentation, I'm going to answer 4 questions. The first is, how is science taught now? Then, why is this approach not effective? How does standards-based curriculum address the issues with the current curriculum and teaching methods? And what are the next steps and what barriers do we need to overcome to actually implement this new curriculum? So when we're talking about how science is taught now, there's been a lot of research to show that science teachers prefer a transmission teaching style, especially in senior grades, with an emphasis on textbooks and lectures. Most of the information given to students, they're just responsible for knowing and not necessarily understanding. The style of teaching is often used, I think, because the curriculum is overloaded with topics to cover. It leaves teachers few options to give students the breadth of information that they need to actually pass the course. To focus on Saskatchewan, our curriculum content is dictated by the government, so that means we get widely prescribed curriculum with little focus on needs, values, or resources of one particular area over another. Additionally, curriculum is really slow to change, and that's partially due to resistance of teachers, but also due to the fact that we have limited resources in our province for actually writing and implementing new curriculum. Also, students perceive science as it's taught now as not useful for them. They don't see how it applies to their life and future developments, and a lack of focus on collaboration, communication, and learning skills in the course actually makes students to see it as something that's not valuable. In general, science is basically being taught as a collection of knowledge that students are expected to obtain. There's little emphasis on deep understanding, practicality of science, or our students' roles as users and developers of science and technology in the future. So why is this approach not effective? Robert Yeager identifies 2 main points in his vision for science education. The first, he says, scientific literacy depends on children's early engagement in science. But then he goes on to say engagement in learning often diminishes when students reach upper elementary and middle school grades. This really stresses the point that science as we're currently teaching it is not really developing that sense of wonder that we want kids to have all throughout their education. It also means that we're not teaching kids content when they're actually mentally capable of understanding it. So the overloaded curriculum and the fact that we're not meeting the intellectual and even emotional abilities of students means that they see science as too challenging and they start to disengage. Additionally, students don't identify that science they're being taught is relevant to their needs and interests. They're not able to make connections between what they learn in science and issues in health, environment, and technology. Really, science education is too focused on preparing students to continue into specific science careers, and it doesn't prepare students who just need a general understanding of science content so that they can use it to make informed decisions in their day-to-day lives. And finally, even though we are focused on preparing students for post-secondary school science, we're actually not doing a very good job of it. High school science teachers identify that students need to have good content knowledge and specific skills in order to be successful in post-secondary school. But professors identified broad skills as more important, so math proficiency, thinking skills, conceptual learning, cooperative learning, and study skills. Most interestingly, the research data actually supports the idea that students perform better in university when high school courses focus on depth of knowledge before breadth of knowledge, and their schools actually had a limited reliance on textbooks and emphasized interactions among students and teachers. So what does this standards-based curriculum look like? So there's 3 main ideas. The first is that content can be prescribed, but it should be broad. It should give individual schools and teachers the opportunity to explore in more detail topics that are relevant to them now and where they are. Students need to be given time to wonder and to really explore ideas so that they make sense. And additionally, content areas should be focused on relevance to general science learners and not focused on those who are actually going to pursue post-secondary school for science or careers in science. Second, students need the opportunity to learn science in an engaging way, where they're actively required to use process skills to investigate, communicate, and solve open-ended problems. We want answers to these problems to not be predetermined or predictable. And third, application of science should be relevant in areas related to technology, society, and the environment. Students should have the chance to investigate real-life problems, careers, and the impact of science and technology on their lives and society. It's also really important to identify that standards-based curriculum doesn't mean students just get to choose to study what they're interested in, although that is an option. It should be envisioned instead as education in which students are responsible for making sense of content. They're given the opportunity to interact with the content in a variety of ways, including lecture, discussion with classmates, interaction with technology, and participation in society as a whole. So why is this kind of curriculum so important? First, one important goal of education is to inspire a love of learning in all of our students. I don't know a lot of teachers that would argue with that. Research shows that students demonstrate better understanding and are better able to apply their learning when they're exposed to standards-based curriculum, provided it's properly implemented. It also gives teachers the flexibility to adapt learning to be accessible to a wider variety of learners. This is increasingly important with inclusive education and having a wide variety of students with different abilities and backgrounds in our classrooms. Second, by maintaining student enthusiasm in science, we're more likely to have students pursue the many broad and necessary careers in science and technology. Our society increasingly revolves around inventions and issues in science, and the futures of jobs in this field are endless. Finally, by dedicating K-12 science teaching to producing students who can think, reason, and analyze science concepts, we will develop more citizens who can make informed opinions on important issues. Some of these issues include things like vaccination and climate change, which are huge issues right now in society. So what are the next steps to actually implementing a curriculum like this? The first is that there needs to be productive, ongoing professional development for teachers. Teachers actually need to be motivated to adopt this new type of curriculum, and that means giving them continuous support, resources, and the opportunity to interact often and productively with the new strategies. Second, we need to get stakeholders actually on board. We have to identify to these parties why a standards-based curriculum is beneficial and how it will improve the quality of learners in our schools. Third, curriculum needs to be developed that identifies 1 to 3 important themes of study at each grade level and no more. Each theme should contain an explanation of content and ideally resources that will allow teachers to prepare and implement their course. And finally, it's really important that pre-service teachers are adequately prepared both pedagogically and in their content knowledge to teach science, regardless of what grade level, and that includes elementary. All teachers who are responsible for science education need to be knowledgeable about the discipline so they can be an effective teacher and actually develop engaging and relevant lessons. This type of curriculum is really important to actually change the face of science education. What we really want is for students to be leaving school and still have that love of learning and actually be able to apply what they've learned in school in their real lives and not just be ready for a career or post-secondary school and education. Thanks for listening.